I gotta say some stuff about gender ideology being forced on kids. Hello, soulmates, welcome back, and dog, bless you. But also hello to the people I am hoping to reach with this video, who I assume aren't already regular viewers for reasons that will soon become obvious. So assuming you're new here, hi, my name is Finn. I am a fitness professional, aspiring YouTuber, acrobatic enthusiast, dog dad, musician, and artist. I love comic books, Star Trek, animation, and the great outdoors. I am also transgender. That is, I was assigned female at birth, but am in fact a man. And I'm going to talk about that, and I hope you're going to stick around and listen. I was born in 1989 and spent my life growing up between rural Ontario and a tiny island in Bahamas. Both communities were pretty religious, but my family was, and to this day remains, pretty progressive. Even so, the cultural zeitgeist at the time of my upbringing labeled anyone under the LGBTQ+ umbrella as them. Not us. Everyone was assumed straight and cisgender until proven otherwise. Gay was for other people, and trans was virtually unheard of. In fact, the term transgender was barely even in the cultural vernacular, but the slurs associated with the identity most certainly were. And they were the big guns, drawn only when you really wanted to shame someone. Trans wasn't just reserved for them. It wasn't even a human experience recognized at arm's length. Rather, it was a taboo so powerful that the mere mention of it was considered inappropriate unless it was explicitly for the purpose of comedy. Shameful insult or utter joke. Take your pick. Not a choice anyone should have to make, let alone a child. From the moment I could form memories, I knew I was different. Or at least different from the only templates of personhood that I had ever seen. I knew the way people addressed me didn't coincide with my understanding of myself. I grew up between two British colonial cultures that sent their babies home from the hospital wrapped in pink or blue with their futures laid out accordingly. No room for discussion, no in-between, and no flexibility. A binary designation with an entire lifetime of expectations along with it, all based on what was between your legs and assigned before you even took your first breath. And the world around me said pink. I said blue. When I told the adults in my life that I was a boy, I wasn't shamed for it, or told that I needed to refer to myself as a girl even if everyone else did. And I was lucky like that. But given the trans taboo, knowledge and understanding of what I was trying to communicate just wasn't there. I can't point to any one person or event that pushed me into hiding and repression. It was more of a gradual wearing down over time. Cultural teaching meant to mold me into the cis default, because there was no available alternative. It was dismissed as just a phase. Normal kid stuff, cis kid stuff specifically. A game of pretend that would eventually come back around to what aligned with what was on my birth certificate. What was correct. What would allow me to exist in the world without being a walking joke or insult. So I experienced girlhood as a boy from the inside looking out. But I wasn't trapped in my body. I was trapped in cultural ignorance. I was trapped in other people's perceptions of the role I was supposed to play. How they let those perceptions affect their treatment of me. The language they would use. The assumptions that they would make. Things that were just wrong. It was like wearing shoes that were just a little too small. It let me get around. It was functional, but it was never comfortable, and it grew increasingly painful with time. But it's all I had ever known. So I assumed it's how everyone felt. Because that's what kids do. They normalize their experiences, even when those experiences are painful. The things assigned to me weren't necessarily bad. They were just associated with being a girl, which I knew I wasn't. But I had no ability or language to communicate that fact. After all, literally saying that I was a boy was simply brushed off as a phase. So where does a child go from there? They assimilate. If everyone I interacted with saw me as a girl, regardless of how I felt, then I was just wrong. I would have to learn to walk in those shoes regardless of how poorly they fit me. So I locked my feelings away and I sought outlets where I could. Male characters in novels, comics, and cartoons that I could live vicariously through. Wearing masculine clothes so that strangers would refer to me with male pronouns and I could ride the high of finally being seen as myself before somebody who knew me corrected them. I used to really look forward to long road trips because I would pass the time by imagining my life as the boy I was supposed to be, and a future wherein I was a man. I wish that I could go back in time and tell my child self that he was right to imagine that future, that I could go back and spare him so much unnecessary pain and suffering and hopelessness. But I can't. I can, however, do my best to make sure other kids don't go through what I went through. And I can do that by living my life openly and honestly as the man I am. And the fact that there are people out there who think that me doing this, just existing as I am, is the same as the conditioning that I lived through, goes to show you how deep it runs. I didn't see depictions of trans people until I was a teenager, and even then only as monsters and punchlines in movies deemed too inappropriate for children. I grew up in a world where trans people were objectified, sexualized, and demonized just for existing, regardless of our behavior, because cis people were threatened by our differences. We weren't even a talking point. We were just villains. Or at the very best, pitiable freaks only ever sympathetically portrayed when it was specifically for the purpose of a cis person flexing their acting talent. We were framed as little more than caricatures of real human beings. I grew up in a world viciously intent on forcing me to be cisgender, and yet here I am, a trans adult, because at one point, I was a trans child. I was not made this way because of the little pieces of masculinity that I held so tightly to in my youth. I sought them out because of who I was born to be. And I did this against an overwhelming current trying to force me in the opposite direction. The belief that you can turn a child trans is born out of the belief that you can turn a child cis. It is the overblown, reactionary counterpart to the reality that we do live in a world with enforced gender ideology, just not in the way people using that phrase want you to think. When I see the way trans youth are being treated, the current attitudes towards people in my community who are just trying to live their lives and be happy, there are no words to describe the rage I experience. I am disgusted by the number of people who have lazily smeared a layer of fake concern over their hate in a pathetic attempt to mask it. Those who insist it's about protecting children from an irreversible process, like there aren't thousands of us out here having gone through exactly that because of people like them. I was forced into a gender that was wrong for me. I was forced to go through the wrong puberty because of other people's beliefs, and the vast majority of trans adults out there share this experience. This population of people that you are apparently so afraid of creating already exists, and we are begging to be heard, but you continue to dismiss us. We are living, breathing examples of people who were conditioned to believe that they are a different gender. People who were forced to go through an irreversible puberty and have to live with that for the rest of our lives. Changes we didn't want. Time we will never get back. It is infuriating to me seeing cis people play up this apparent need to protect children from social conditioning like they haven't committed exactly that. Not only are they wrongfully accusing trans people of something abhorrent, the act they're accusing us of is something that they have been perpetuating against us for years. They are fear-mongering a hypothetical appropriated from the incredibly real suffering of trans people. They scream, "Protect the children," while pushing for legislation and attitudes that have been demonstrably harming children for decades. And the data is in. When it comes to gender-affirming care, it is the right decision for the vast majority of us. But it's not about protecting children. It's not about protecting anyone. It is about mandating the cisgender experience and pushing the lie of the cis blank slate. This is why the possibility of a cis person making a mistake is prioritized over the very high likelihood of a trans person suffering. Kids are not straight and cisgender by default and then changed along the way. When you decided to become a parent, you made a choice to bring a unique individual into this world. Someone with their own experiences, perspectives, and identity. You don't get to decide what that is. And if you're the kind of person who would reject your child for not being the version of a human being that you are comfortable with, the only person in need of fixing here is you. This terrifying reality of children being forced into a performative gender ideology by people who completely control the narrative and erase all opposition isn't the dystopian future we are destined for. It is the past we are breaking away from. During my formative years, I saw nothing but cisgender, heterosexual people. In reality, in fiction, everywhere. Because it was all that was available. But I'm still bi, and I'm still trans. If just seeing queer people prompts your child to come out, it's not because they were turned into something they're not. It's because they experienced something that was denied to so many of us as children, which is simply seeing a place for themselves in this world as they are. That they don't have to perform a role they know isn't right. The only thing ruining their innocence and stealing precious years from them are the people shrieking hatred. Grown adults, in many cases their own parents, sexually harassing an entire demographic of people by deeming our very existence a perversion. It's incredibly telling and beyond creepy how utterly sex-obsessed transphobic people are. Again, it's disgusting. And it enrages me to know that despite having done this already, having proved how vile and baseless these accusations are, we apparently have to do it all over again. We have to raise yet another generation of queer children who are wise beyond their years because they fucking have to be to survive in this world that you created. The only difference is that this time it's not because they're invisible, but because they can be seen. Because some of you would still choose to traumatize your own children rather than change your minds and admit that you were wrong. My parents didn't have the information to support me. But once they did, supporting me was never a question, because that is what it means to love your child. In this day and age, there is no excuse. If your kid told you they're queer and your first reaction was to seek fringe sources that validate your rejection and resistance, you chose hatred. You went looking for it. You made the conscious decision to hurt someone that you brought into this world to protect. Some kids will go through phases. Some will explore and then change their minds. This is a normal part of the human experience when its boundless and beautiful variety has been normalized. If you are truly scared about your child making an irreversible decision, then you will listen and work with them to figure out what is right. And this is most easily done in an environment where they don't have to navigate your hatred in their search for self-love. Anti-queer bigots are leaning into this conversion horror story because it embodies the very same tactics that they have been using against us for years. The only agenda being shoved down anyone's throat is heterosexual, cisgender, and binary. That's how it's always been, and the people out there yelling about it betray the fact that they know this in their very protests. Because they recognize that in order to perpetuate their agenda, they have to have absolute narrative control. No one is erasing cis or straight people. We are just demonstrating that queer people also exist, and that is what they can't handle. What they are mourning is the loss of a world where we are isolated, scared, and confused, where we are pushed into hiding because we have no community to turn to. So they attack our visibility, because they know deep down that we are as natural as the sunrise and twice as bright. This is the last-ditch effort of a dying system grasping at control, and no amount of kicking and screaming is going to force us back into the dark. So to all my trans, queer, and non-conforming siblings, stay proud and keep shining.
We're debating whether trans folks should have access to health care, we're objectifying them. When we see senators in Supreme Court confirmations talking about mutilating children, we're objectifying children, talking about children's genitalia, which is disgusting. And when we objectify, we dehumanize. And that is what this whole project has been about, not making trans people real people, human beings who exist. I exist. There's no trans question. I'm not a question. I exist here. I have a material reality, lived experiences, and trans people have always existed, and we're not going to stop existing if people don't teach about us.
That's something really important, that we have always existed. And because of your example and your advocacy, young people now grappling with these questions about their identity have someone to look to.
Yes.
When you and I were growing up, we're around the same age. We didn't have that.
No.
We didn't have people to look up to. So I'm curious for you what it was like growing up in Alabama. What was it like for you? What was it like to you to not have these examples?
I mean, there were suicide attempts. There was a tremendous amount of shame. I was bullied every single day. I was chased home from school. I was beaten up multiple times. There were no trans people on television, and what I did see was deeply disparaging. I didn't want to be trans. I did everything I could not to be trans, but I'm trans anyway. I grew up in an environment where there was no education about trans people, yet I was still trans, and yet I found my way.